Hallo und guten Tag, Deutschstudenten. Welcome back to another tutorial video. In this lesson, we'll learn about the present perfect tense, das Perfekt, okay, which is the conversational past in German. And although there are other past tenses in German, including the simple past, das Imperfekt, as well as the past perfect, das Plusquamperfekt, the present perfect is a very important one and one that is used mostly in conversation. I'll have separate tutorials for ordinal numbers, dates, and years, as well as one for word order, which is built on a previous tutorial from week 3. And just to note, too, this tutorial will probably be in 2 parts because of length. Also, fangen wir an. Los geht's. Okay, as I mentioned, the present perfect tense is used to describe past events in conversational situations. Okay, it consists of an auxiliary verb, okay, the helping verb, which happens to be either haben or sein, okay, plus the past participle of the modified verb. Let's look at an example here. Ich spiele Fußball, for instance, being a present tense statement on the left, meaning I play soccer. Can also be interpreted as I'm playing soccer or I will play soccer, depending on other parts of the speech that are used. Now, looking on the right and how the statement would be expressed in the present perfect, ich habe Fußball gespielt. Okay, so just like in the present tense, there are multiple ways of interpreting this statement. I have played soccer, I have been playing soccer, I was playing soccer, and I did play soccer. So all depending on the other parts of speech used. Okay, so you've had situations when 2 verbs are required in the present tense. For instance, with modal verbs, where the modal verb is verb 1 and the modified verb is verb 2. Ich kann sehr gut kochen. Okay, for instance. The word order in the present perfect is similar to this type of scenario. Okay, so the auxiliary verb being verb 1, okay, where the past participle is verb 2 and is placed at the end of that statement or clause. So let's look at how we'd use the verb spielen, okay, as it applies to the pronouns, and in this case uses the auxiliary verb haben. Okay, note in the present perfect, and as I mentioned earlier, the auxiliary verb is only going to be either haben or sein. We'll preview some examples of which verbs require these 2 helping verbs momentarily. So in this table you'll notice the verb spielen, which is considered a regular verb and has the following properties: the prefix ge and suffix t. Okay, so regular verbs with a verb stem ending in d or t, all right, have a suffix of et. For example, arbeiten, okay, which is hat gearbeitet. All right, you see how that works? So now let's look at an example of an irregular verb, finden. Okay, so an irregular verb tends to have a vowel stem change in its past participle form, and in the present perfect tense, it often adds the prefix ge and has a suffix of en. Okay, so take finden, for instance. Its past participle is gefunden. Okay, I did say that irregular verbs tend to have a stem change, like finden does here, but not all of them do. For example, laufen would be gelaufen, fahren would be gefahren. Just note that the tendency is for there to be a change. So if you think of it this way, and especially if your native language is English, to take the verbs take, swim, write, drink, and think of how they are used in the past tense. We would have took, swam, ran, wrote, and drank. So note that each of these has a stem change in the past tense. So their equivalents in German do the same thing. To take, nehmen, genommen. To swim, schwimmen, geschwommen. To write, schreiben, geschrieben. And to drink, trinken, getrunken. So it'll take some time to get used to both regular and irregular verbs, but my advice, as always, especially now, create a separate list of each to distinguish the two and memorize them as we move ahead in the course. So let's look back at some additional regular verbs and how their past participles are slightly different in the present perfect tense. Okay, verbs ending in iren. Okay, they do not add the prefix g, but they always end with the suffix t. A few examples of these are reparieren, telefonieren, and funktionieren. So let's look at reparieren, to repair, here in this table. Okay, so in the present tense we'd have ich repariere mein Fahrrad. In the present perfect it would be ich habe mein Fahrrad repariert. Good. So one trick with remembering the past participle of these verbs is simply to recall how they be conjugated using third person pronouns, er, sie, and es. So if the previous example had replaced ich with, let's say, Martina, then it would be Martina repariert mein Fahrrad in the present tense, and Martina hat mein Fahrrad repariert in the present perfect. Okay, so moving on to a very important aspect in the present perfect, and that is when to use haben and when to use sein as the auxiliary or helping verb. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll now devote some time to that. So by looking at this slide, there are specific verbs whose auxiliary is haben as well as those using sein. Okay. For verbs that require sein as the helping verb, and by the way, I will change intermittently on the identification of haben or sein as either the auxiliary or helping verb. So okay, back to my point. So for verbs that require sein as the helping verb, the same rules of the perfect tense apply, except that they use sein as the second verb instead of haben. Okay, so there are two, I guess let's call them conditions that require sein as the helping verb, location change and change of condition. Okay, so think of it this way. If there is a change in location, for example, if you change your state of being from point A to point B, then use sein as the helping verb. If the conditional change, then use sein as the helping verb. So what verbs would fit these conditions? Let's have a look. Location changes, changing from point A to point B require movement, right? Think of driving, walking, hiking, biking, flying, swimming, coming, running, and going, just as a few instances. So all of these verbs typically represent a change in location and therefore require the verb sein as their auxiliary. So in German they are fahren, spazieren gehen, wandern, Fahrrad fahren, fliegen, schwimmen, kommen, laufen, and gehen, just to name a few. Now there are many, many more included, but these are some good ones to get started with. So now let's think of conditional changes. These might be a change in the weather. Think of hot to cold, or vice versa, or sunny to rainy, snowy to icy, etc. Each of these indicates some type of change in conditions. Or if you are healthy 1 minute of the day and achy or sick later on, or if you're sick and then get better. Either way, a change in condition has occurred. All right, so it's very important, a very important German verb used in these instances is werden, okay, which means to become. So now werden can also be used in the future tense and is used as verb 1, but let's talk about that later. And then another verb that uses sein as its helping verb to represent a conditional change is sterben, to die. So since we're getting a little long here, we'll continue this topic in a separate tutorial. Okay, and so we'll finish there for now. Stay tuned for the follow-up tutorial on the present perfect. Bis dahin und auf Wiedersehen.